Good afternoon, everyone. This is Julie Stein with McGraw-Hill Education, and I am the Associate Product Marketing Manager for the Specialized Solutions Group. We are so pleased to have all of you join us today to talk about a very important topic, adolescent literacy. Today's session, we have with us Mike and Irma Hoke, who are two of the authors of Fusion Reading, a program offered by McGraw-Hill Education. Today's session, we will be giving away one TE set of Fusion Reading at the conclusion of the webinar, and we will be notifying you by email. I want to remind everyone today that the session will be muted, so you will not have audio sound coming into the session. However, if you would like to communicate with the authors or any of the presenters today, please feel free to type your notes in the chat window or the questions box located in the control panel on your screen. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we will be providing you with a survey, and it is very critical that you complete this to provide us feedback on today's session. And with that, I would like to begin today's session by giving you an overview of the challenges of adolescent literacy. We will move into a session with the authors and conclude today's session working with some funding options and opportunities for funding adolescent literacy programming. Literacy is one of the most critical components of academic success. But the majority of students today are leaving high school without the reading and writing skills needed to succeed in college and a career. More than ever, students need advanced literacy skills to succeed in a fast-paced global economy. Between 1973 and 2008, the share of jobs in the U.S. economy requiring post-secondary education increased from 28% to 59%. Yet over the past 4 decades, literacy performance of 17-year-olds, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, has remained relatively flat overall. In the face of this literacy crisis, the majority of states have agreed to dramatically improve reading and writing instruction across all grade levels by adopting the English Language Arts Common Core State Standards. Students must show a steady increase in their ability to read complex text and write reasoned arguments based on evidence. Ensuring that young people graduate from high school with these advanced skills is essential for their success in the modern world. And with that, we have two experts on adolescent literacy with us today, and we are so pleased for you to have the opportunity to meet the authors. Michael Hoke is the Associate Director at the University of Kansas. His research includes the development and validation of reading, motivation, and tutoring interventions that meet the needs of districts or agencies, as well as the needs of academically underprepared adolescents and adults. His research also focuses on professional development, instructional coaching, and the school change process. Irma Hoke is a research associate also at the University of Kansas. Her research interests include adolescent literacy, instructional technology, coaching, and instructional sustainability. She has coordinated several federally funded research and development projects, including one to design and field test a reading skill profile for struggling adolescent readers. Her extensive experience as a classroom teacher is highly regarded for her skills as a professional development specialist in adolescent literacy and secondary school change. And with that, again, we are so pleased to have with us today the authors of Fusion Reading, and they will be discussing challenges faced by adolescent readers, helping you to explore some solutions to those challenges, and then responding to questions from the participants. And then finally, we will be integrating Aaron Rush, who is a grant specialist for McGraw-Hill Education, into our session today to talk about some funding solutions to address these adolescent literacy challenges. With that, I will turn it over to the authors.
Thank you, Julie. This is Irma, and we sure appreciate the opportunity to spend time with all of you today for an hour. And in particular, I appreciate all the support that McGraw-Hill has provided us in our ventures at looking at resolving some of the issues faced by students who are struggling readers out there. Mike and I will divide up our presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to him to get us started. And once again, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet with you. I wanted to first start our conversation by building some context for adolescent literacy based on some of the research we've done here at the University of Kansas. We were very interested in answering this question of who are struggling adolescent readers and what skill levels do they have. And so we conducted a major descriptive study in the Kansas City area to address what we think is a national problem that's been in existence for quite a while. As you can see from this quote from Michael Camille of Stanford, there's a tremendous number of adolescents in this country who are unable to read and comprehend the material in their textbooks. And we think that this challenge is going to be exacerbated with the adoption of the Common Core State Standards, where reading comprehension will play an even more critical role in the success that adolescents experience in school. Julie mentioned this briefly, but if you take a look at the NAEP data updated with the 2012 results, you can see that our history of success hasn't been very good with adolescent readers. We've had some impact with 9-year-olds, particularly after the Reading First effort. Our middle school 13-year-olds have been relatively stable over the last 35 years, and our older students, our high school students, have been almost flat-lying in terms of their ability to read and comprehend text material. If we look at the most recent ACT scores, we see that this trend reflects this lack of growth in reading comprehension. The overall ACT composite scores are down for 2013 overall, and particularly in reading and English. These are the lowest skills that students have scored on the ACT in 5 years. And while the good news is that more students are off to college and more students are taking the ACT and SAT tests, the not so good news is that their performance once they get to college is not as good as it once was. And the impact of this challenge is that in America, we have about 5% of the world's population, and we have about 25% of the world's incarcerated population, more than any other nation. And there is a strong correlation between those who have been incarcerated and their academic skills, reading skills in particular. This drove us to think about what can we find out about adolescent readers that would inform the development of adolescent reading programs. As I mentioned earlier, we ran a large descriptive study in the Kansas City, Kansas area. We tested exemplary readers as measured by the Kansas State Assessment, all the way to unsatisfactory readers to see how they were alike and to see how they were different. In this analysis, if you imagine here on this graph that I'm going to build with you, a score of 100, a standard score of 100 would be, quote, average, if there is such a thing as average, but it would be the middle, the mean score of all of the people who took the test. And that's kind of a measure where we look to see who's being successful and who isn't. And we looked at proficient readers. These were students scoring at the exemplary or above average level. And you can see that in alphabetics, word recognition, phonics, word attack, they have those skills almost at a 1 standard deviation above the mean, which is a significant factor. We looked at fluency, that's high. We looked at vocabulary, that's high. We looked at comprehension. So we have one faction of adolescent readers who are doing very well. And the thing that jumps out at you is that they're doing very well in all of these critical components of reading. On the other hand, we looked at students who weren't doing so well. And we looked at their scores in alphabetics, in fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And you can see the perhaps not unexpected profile of students who struggle with reading, and that is they are near a standard deviation below the mean in all of those reading component skills. Now that's a significant finding in that several groups felt that all adolescent reading all adolescent struggling readers needed was instruction in comprehension. Well, they do need that, but they need a lot more. If we just look at how they look at, on a profile of mean scores, we can see that as a group, struggling readers have significant reading needs. Now, we wanted to look at the group of struggling readers and analyze that data a little bit further. So we wanted to really test the hypothesis, is there just one type of struggling readers, or are there multiple types of struggling readers? And I think, as most of you know, we found multiple clusters, different types of struggling reader groups. Now, this is a very busy graph. I apologize for that. But the message here is that there are at least 5 different subtypes of struggling readers. There are those who are nearly 2 standard deviations below the mean. That would be the red line on the screen. And you can see on all of those reading tests that it's fairly flat line across all of the components of reading. Just above them is another group with a similar profile, but at 1 standard deviation below the mean. So they have skill deficits, but not quite as severe. Right above them is the orange line, and these students have nearly average reading skills in terms of vocabulary, but they are disfluent. Their word attack skills are intact, but they don't read with accuracy and efficiency. Above those 3 groups are 2 groups of students that have a pretty good profile in terms of reading skills. They're average or above. But this is a small group. It's probably about 20%. They still don't comprehend well. And these are students we think have probably not a rich stable of reading comprehension strategies. They have good reading skills, but they're not very strategic in their approach to reading. But anyway, to close on this slide, what we've discovered is that about 80% of the students who struggle with reading lack skills in all of the reading component areas. Now, I just wanted to share briefly with you that their skills are lacking. We also wanted to know how well do they, what is their affect in reading? Do they have hope? Are they motivated to read? Have they given up? And so we administered a measure we call the Hope Scale, developed by Rich Snyder here at KU. And as you can see, the struggling readers and the proficient readers score almost the same in terms of the desire to attain goals, having knowledge about how to get to goals, and an overall hope score. So that's important information for all of us to know. While they struggle with reading, they have not given up. We administered John Guthrie's Motivation for Reading questionnaire, and just a couple sample questions showed us that struggling readers want to be better readers, good readers, get good reading grades more so than the proficient reader group. Those questions are on the left of the slide. On the right hand of the slide, we ask questions about how well they think they read, and in contrast, they know that they're not as good as proficient readers and they score themselves lower. So they want to be good readers, they know they don't have the skills. This is an interesting slide in terms of, are they still willing to try? And this is the attendance profile of a group of struggling readers. We're starting with the first 9 weeks of school. You can see by their attendance, and each letter to the left represents a student. Each of those students, for the most part, showed up for the first 9 weeks of school. Very few of them missed more than 1 or 2 days. They were with us. They showed up, asked us to work with them again. However, by the next 9 weeks, they started to miss a lot. They continued to miss a lot. They missed a lot in the spring. They ended up missing 50 to 60 days a year. And our takeaway from that is that students show up, they want to be better readers, perhaps they're getting the same thing that didn't work in the past, and they shut down. We asked teachers about this challenge, and we asked them to tell us whether or not they thought struggling adolescent readers could really improve their skills if they were given high-quality instruction. And the results are a little disappointing in that the majority of teachers felt that the students probably couldn't make much progress. So in sum, struggling readers seem to have hope. They want to be better readers. They begin each year hopeful. Sometimes they're disappointed. And a lot of their teachers are skeptical as to whether or not they can become better readers. All of this drove our efforts to develop an adolescent reading program that responded to the specific needs of the students as characterized by the research we did with close to 400 students in middle school and high school. And what we did over time was come up with a 2-year comprehensive adolescent reading program. Now, I have in quotes the 2-year. Number one comment is that these are significant reading deficits that struggling readers possess, and they just don't disappear quickly. And the other reason I have it in quotes is that some of the people we've worked with have taught Fusion in a year, some in 2 years, some in even 3 years. Some students have been in the program for 6 months and exited because their skills had improved. Some students remained in the program for 3 years. Now, that kind of drove the creation of our program, and Irma is going to walk you through our goal and then the program components that make up Fusion Reading.
Thank you, Mike. Well, our goal was to dramatically improve and impact the reading proficiency of these struggling adolescent readers. So we sat down at the table, looked at all the information that Mike just shared with you as far as what we were finding in the research and the data that we were collecting, and spent many days brainstorming, well, how can we make a change here? What has to happen? And so over the past 7 years, we've been trying to tackle this issue. And our biggest goal was that we found that we knew we needed, in order to close that gap, that we're going to need to have more than 1 year's growth in a year in order to impact a change for these students if we were going to allow them to have access to the general ed curriculum and participate in society as a whole and contribute to that. So from that data and information we gathered, we put together this 2-year reading program, and what I'd like to do right now is give you a peek into that or a glimpse of the components of the program, and would like to make an upfront statement that over the past 7 years, Fusion has become what it has because of input from teachers and the struggling adolescent readers. This was not something that we just did here in isolation. This really truly was done with partnerships in the field and continue to be addressed in that manner. So the first slide, probably one of the most important pieces that has made Fusion Reading powerful for teachers and provided ease of use, is providing them with a format in which to deliver the instruction, and you see that in front of you. We design 90 and 60-minute lesson plans, and these plans follow a specific format daily. Each class period would begin with a warm-up, a time for something called thinking reading, a time to do the explicit instruction, and you'll see that's the bigger chunk of time, daily time for vocabulary instruction, and then a wrap-up of the day. Now, just to briefly explain, the warm-up prepares students to think about what's going to happen during the thinking reading time. Thinking reading, just briefly, is a time when teachers are modeling expert teacher behaviors where it isn't just modeling kind of content questions, but it goes deeper than that. It goes to the fact of what's the process that expert readers use to attain meaning and understanding, and they bring that out front for students to hear as they're doing their reading. So that's a real difference in what you may see often when teachers are doing a read aloud or guided reading. Thinking reading truly is about bringing to the forefront how you think while you read. Explicit instruction time, we begin with getting the course established. I think all of us would be in agreement that if we don't have a well-managed, an environment that provides opportunities for students to take risks, we're not going to get to the task of learning and teaching. So we specifically set up a program to get the course established. And in doing so, you'll see that we have classroom procedures that are explicitly taught to students. Students are taught the procedures and how thinking reading will occur in this Fusion Reading course. Students are explicitly taught a 7-step process for how they will tackle learning new vocabulary. They're also taught how they will go about expanding their reading by doing an activity called book study, which will eventually occur outside of the classroom and becomes more of what most of us would think of as the homework. But our goal behind that is to allow students to learn how to fall in love with a book and take ownership and see how that opens doors for them. It's also the time during this explicit instruction time to provide opportunities for teachers to do baseline assessments and post-assessments. So we've allotted that time during explicit instruction to establish the course. So once all of that has taken place, this format follows to the next phase, which is to move that explicit instruction time to actually guiding and teaching explicitly reading strategies, where teachers explain, model, provide multiple types of practices, integrate and generalize this to the general ed curriculum. Specifically, in year one, the reading strategies include, first the prediction strategy, a comprehension strategy, and that was a conscious decision to start with a comprehension strategy simply because we were working with adolescents. In our initial phases of putting this program together, and all of us may think, but they have word level problems. We got to tackle them with words first before they can read. Well, what we found is adolescents have been fighting that for years. And by starting with that, we were not going to re-engage disengaged readers. So consciously, we made the decision to start with a strategy that provided ease and use and application to re-engage students in the reading process. So we start with a prediction strategy, a comprehension strategy. Once that's under their belt, we move into something that I think is probably foundational and unique to this entire program and working with adolescents, which is possible selves for readers. This program shifts from the teacher feeding students strategies to allowing students to realize how learning to read will impact their life. So what Possible Selves for Readers does is allow teachers and students to take time to build relationships. And without those relationships and that trust built, it's really difficult for these struggling adolescents to trust that really what you have to provide for them to learn to read will make an impact. If you think back to the slide that Mike shared with you about the data on attendance, this is why we consciously made the effort to put this right here. We want to keep them with us. So Possible Selves for Readers occurs at this point for that specific reason, as well as shifting that whole attitude towards, I'm at school, the teacher's going to teach me something too. I'm at school, I can benefit. I can take this places with me. Then we move to the bridging strategy. Now this is where the majority of time is attended to word level skill and strategy development. We tackle things like advanced phonics, word decoding, and recognition and fluency. And it's a huge chunk of the second semester that students are engaged in this strategy. And it seems, as we've looked over the years, to be a time when adolescents have built that relationship with us that they will take a risk to go back and tackle this word level stuff. And we found that placing it at this point in time has been very powerful and has really impacted some of the reading outcomes. To wrap up year one, we pull everything we've been working together on as far as strategy development, vocabulary development, thinking reading development, into something called strategy integration. Another unique piece to Fusion Reading. Here we're saying, okay, as expert readers, we use a multitude of strategies as we read. How do we teach students to be the executive of all those strategies and skills as well? So strategy integration is our means to help students bring all of these strategies together and apply them with their general ed real world reading. And that's how we wrap up year one. Then as year two comes around, we dive into more development of their toolkit with strategies and skills, and we begin to tackle things like the summarization strategy, which is more applicable to content area textbooks. And Then we move to strategy integration again, where students are taking everything they learned from year one plus summarization and applying that to the general ed curriculum. Then the third item here in that second round bubble is something called the PASS strategy. And that strategy has been designed to arm our students with the skills and strategies to tackle standardized assessment, which we all know is key. Is we can learn to become proficient readers, but we need to move the needle a little bit. So we needed to arm our students the best that we could to tackle those type of assessments. And then in year two, we wrap up with something called strategy integration. Underlying all of this is something called book study I mentioned earlier, because by this point in time, that's occurring outside of the classroom. And the other thing that occurs with within Fusion Reading that it doesn't show on this slide is we do have an assessment built across all units and pre and post tests, and we allot time for that to occur. Here's another glimpse of what it may look like with a scope and sequence, if you will. And what I want to highlight here is that we've included on this slide that we do have specific novels and types of readings that are occurring for students to get their eyes on the page and re-engage in reading. We have specifically picked novels that were field tested with students to say, would you read this, would you not? Are you going to steal this book and run away with it? And if you're not doing that, then we're not using it. So what we were fortunate to find is the Bluford series, and you'll see The Bully, Brothers in Arms, Call of the Wild, Secrets in the Shadows. And those have been very powerful novels to re-engage students in the reading process. And I was just in a couple of different states recently working with teachers in Fusion, and they're having to reorder books because seriously the students are stealing those. And in our most poverty-stricken areas that I was just in last week, 6th graders were reading the novel Coach Carter and were so engaged because it's a part of their culture. They could relate to it. There was another school district I was in with 6th graders where they opted to use Freak the Mighty simply because their culture and their environment, that was a more conducive type of reading book to bring in there. In the process of developing the program, we did consciously make the effort to think about the content of the novel and what we were teaching at that point in time within that unit. So for example, with Establish the Course, if many of you are familiar with Coach Carter, you would recall that he has some very strict guidelines and expectations for his athletes. Well, the idea behind Establish the Course in Fusion Reading is to develop those procedures and expectations and guidelines so that students can re-engage and reinvest in their learning. So we consciously made the effort to select Coach Carter to go along with that. We've also been aware that we need to also be flexible and have multiple representations of multiple cultures and school districts across the country, and have looked at opportunities to bring in other novels. And I'm taking time to talk about this because I know this has become an issue at points in times, if you will, for people as they're talking about Fusion Reading. So I wanted to be clear and understood why the selection of these novels have been put in place. So that's a glimpse at year one. Here's a glimpse at year two. Once again, you'll see we have the Bluford series along with the readings, expository and narrative. And by the way, those are our McGraw-Hill timed reading passages, and we have a multitude of options there. The ones that we have specific to the program range in grade level 4 through 9. But there's also another supplemental pack that teachers can have for their classroom that have lower level reading. Because we found that in middle school, you may have students in the program that are about a 3rd grade level reader, and we need to have some options for reading. The other thing, as we start out year two, you'll see that we have a novel called We Beat the Streets. If you're unfamiliar with that, we consciously, again, took the opportunity to do a book that showed an example of 3 young men who were struggling through high school and made a pact that they were going to make it through and be successful in life. And they are 2 doctors and a dentist, and they tell their story there, and we regenerate and re-engage students at the beginning of the year with that novel. And we haven't seen any pushback on that novel at all. People have really engaged in that one. Okay, so moving along, and just to recap so we're all on the same page. So basically we have a multi-component intensive reading program that has three major elements: motivation, reading instruction, and classroom management. And these are the manuals and the layout of it. You'll see the establish the course, prediction, possible social readers, bridging, strategy integration, summarization, and path. Supporting within those with prediction, bridging, and summarization are student workout books or student, workout books is what I call them. This is a look at what the novels look like in year 1 and year 2, just to give you a glimpse. And I know that we have worked with McGraw Hill to have this package available for districts and teachers to purchase along with the program. And so the question comes that many of us face is, well, how would this relate to the Common Core state standards? And we need to address that because districts are really looking at alignment. We did work here at the Center for Research and Learning at KU and look at alignment with the Common Core state standards. And 70% of the Fusion reading material aligns with the reading strategies and skills that are needed to meet the Common Core state standards. So let's take a deep breath and step back, and why don't you join me and take a quick peek from 10,000 feet of what this may look like if you were in a school. So if you were in a school where Fusion reading was going on, you'd walk into a classroom and you would see classroom management in place. In other words, you would see classroom expectations up, you would see procedures and routines in place that immediately would let you know that this is a Fusion classroom. Students come to the door, there's a certain procedure for walking into the classroom, getting the classroom started. There's certain procedures that happen during each instructional phase of the class, and you would also see students demonstrating how they would leave the class. And here's a quick peek at the classroom procedures that we put in place in the Fusion reading program. You'll see that we've thought about the direct instruction time, thinking reading time, how do you work with a partner, how do you begin and end class, how do you enter class late. So we really have tried to consider all the different transitional moments that we lose instructional time that we need to grab a hold of and move with ease. So what we have found these classroom procedures to truly impact for teachers is limiting the amount of transition time, moving it to a smooth, easy move from one activity to another without 10 minutes lost. Because we really, truly have an urgent situation to use every single minute to tackle the issue of helping these students become readers. They really are so far behind that we don't have a minute to waste, and we really designed Fusion to try not to waste 1 minute. As I mentioned earlier, we also have thinking reading, and you would see this going on. And during that point in time, you would see the teacher up front reading one of those Bluford series novels. And during that time, they may be forecasting upcoming strategies that are in the Fusion reading program. Like you may hear them use the language like, gosh, I predict that this may be going on. Here's some clues that led me to believe that that prediction was going to happen. Or you may see later in the year them actually applying a strategy that they've already taught students. So you would actually hear them say something like, well, in the prediction strategy, we have the C step. And in the C step, we check for clues. So let's do that here. Further in the year with Fusion, you may hear them talk about integrating multiple strategies. So as they're reading with the students, you would hear them talk about not only prediction, but vocabulary and bridging and a multitude of all the strategies that come together. The other unique thing that happens during thinking reading is initially students get multiple times of hearing an expert reader, and the teacher gradually shifts that responsibility to the student. So it moves that process from the teacher to the student through teacher guiding that to students actually leading the process. Then you would see students head into something called explicit instruction time. So if you're in this class, you've seen them walk in, you've seen them reading a novel, you see this great transition, we're going to direct instruction time, we're going to be working on the prediction strategy. So you may see the teacher explaining, modeling, and demonstrating the prediction strategy, or you may see students doing practice where the teacher may be initially modeling, guiding it, partner practice going on, individual practice going on, a variety of different ways to have multiple opportunities to practice the steps. Then they would transition to vocabulary. We have vocabulary built in daily because what we found when we looked at all the data that Mike shared, that vocabulary has a tremendous impact on the outcomes in reading. So you'll see that vocabulary is presented every single day for students. And we also have found, like, the adolescent struggling reader, many of them just lack that prior knowledge, that lack of understanding. So we've really tuned into vocabulary and did a lot of review of the literature and have found that this has been very impactful, the process that we've put into place. And what you will see is there's 7 steps to this process. So after you see students going through prediction, you would see the teacher transitioning and asking students to get out their steno books. We're going to practice vocabulary now. This is so very different than what you may see in other classrooms. We're not giving them a list of words, look it up in the dictionary, get the definition, we'll have a test. This is teacher-led, teacher-guided. Students and teachers work together to have great, deep discussions about words. So they may only cover 1 or 2 words a week, but in covering those 1 to 2 words, they're going to have discussions about multiple words that contain the same type of affixes that are in that one word we're covering. So even though it may be 1 word, students may actually talk about 22 words in 1 week. So it's very powerful. We've had great outcomes with that. So the next question is, this all sounds great, but how do we really, really, really make this happen? When you have a comprehensive program like this that we really want to impact teachers and the outcomes of students, it's not something they pull off the shelf and they just go do on their own. We've tried that. We wanted to do that. We gave it a shot before our partnership with McGraw Hill came on board, and quite frankly, it fell. And you know, we picked our pieces up, and that's when we got to work with McGraw Hill. We thought, well, this is another way that we can sustain and grow this effort. So in order to get the type of results that Mike will be sharing with you here in a little bit, we have found that the professional development and coaching needs to be discussed up front in the initial phases of putting this type of program into place. There's multiple ways to have professional development provided. As you know, we have the online professional development module. We also have live face-to-face professional development authored by both Mike and myself and our team. We have a combination of the two. But it's even more than just getting the professional development. That's one piece of the puzzle, but to truly get fidelity and impact, what we have found over the past 3 years is without the coaching and support that teachers need to have someone in there and helping them implement this very complex, comprehensive program, it's just not going to get in place the way that it could to get the results we need. And just to remind you, what we're really trying to do is close a gap and gain over 1 year's worth of gain for students. We want 2-year growth, 3-year growth in 1 year. So this requires that type of attention. And then also one of the things that we have found is that we have to help them in districts build sustainability. So one way that we've tackled that is to work with districts to provide academies with fusion reading where we do the trainer-trainers model, and we coach the coaches model that we have put in place and work with teachers and districts to help them sustain their efforts long after all of us have been there and gone. We don't want it to be, oh, now that they're there, it doesn't work. We want this to continue without us. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Mike now, and he's going to share with you some of the exciting things that we've been finding as we've looked at folks who have been doing full implementation of Fusion.
And I'm not going to take a lot of time to do this. I mean, there's a technical report that's available on the McGraw Hill website, and we have that report available here at the Center for Research on Learning, and you can get it for free. It kind of summarizes the research. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the scope of the research that we've conducted in the different types of schools and the different geographic locations. and point out that a measure of success in our mind is something called effect size. It's different than a statistical difference. It really says what's the magnitude of the gain that the students make. And an effect size of around 0.20 is considered small. And as John Hattie shares with us, we should be looking at effect sizes at 0.40 or above. As you can see, the ES or effect size for most of our studies is in excess of 0.40. Some of them are extremely high. And I just wanted to, from this list of projects, take you to one of our most recent research sites. That would be in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. And this is data put together by the district. And this is a pretty busy graph as well. But on the left-hand side, there were 12 middle schools involved in this study, and close to about 260 students. All of these students are students with IEPs and reading goals, all of them. We used a quick and clean test called the Test of Silent Contextualized Reading Fluency. It's quick, clean, the kind of test that students don't mind taking because it takes about 3 minutes, and it's kind of a fun test to take, but it correlates strongly with other measures of comprehension. But you can see that if you look at the bottom row in yellow, that the pretest score for across the district was a standard score of 83. That's a standard deviation below the mean, and the grade level was 3.6. After about 7 months of instruction in Charlotte across all these schools and all these students, we saw the kind of increases that we really targeted. Remember, our goal is to close the gap, so it's got to be more than a year's growth. You can see that the mean growth across all 12 schools, this would be the bottom right-hand corner, was 1.7 years. This is after 1 year of fusion. Now, this year we're continuing at that research site. If we were able to continue that 1.5, 1.7 growth rate, we will have essentially closed the gap by the time students are ending their seventh grade year at school. Another slide I wanted to share with you from Charlotte is the number of students who made progress with Fusion and the number of students who had negative growth, because that happens sometimes for a variety of reasons. 85% of the students had positive growth, and most of those students had more than a year and a half growth. We had about 15% of the student population not make the kind of growth we wanted, and so we need to look at factors related to the quality of instruction they received and whether it was delivered with fidelity. And we also need to see if we're meeting the needs of all of the students in the population. I would not be surprised to find that we do have a subgroup where we either need more time or we need to change instruction a bit to respond to their needs. We asked students a number of questions, and this is another busy graph, but basically when we asked students how they liked Fusion, do they find themselves reading more? Are they satisfied with the program? Would they recommend it to others? The ratings by students were usually 85% or higher. They enjoyed the class. They liked the instruction that they received. And this is one of our main goals. As you remember the slide about attendance, these students are not walking out. They're not giving up. They're hanging in there with us for the entire year. So when you fuse all of this conversation together, what we find is that there are many struggling adolescent readers who are unable to thrive in the current system and instruction and programs that they're involved with. That their needs are comprehensive. They need, and number one, they need really great, skilled, persistent, and kind of on-your-feet teachers, because teachers matter a great deal in terms of student outcomes. And then teachers, in turn, need great instructional materials. It needs to be ready, usable, and it needs to be philosophically aligned to what they believe about instruction. And finally, we think that teachers deserve stellar PD and effective coaching to support them during implementation of programs that make a difference. So The final point is that we think we're at a point where we can start to turn that data that shows flatline growth over 35 years. Under certain conditions in certain schools, we've been able to move the needle on students who participate in fusion reading. And at the very beginning, we talked about what's the profile and why we do this kind of work. And Irma and I are both driven by the fact that we can impact life outcomes for students. They're what it's all about. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions. We have about 15 minutes left, and we'll respond to those as best we can.
Okay, Mike, this is Julie. We have a couple questions. One of them was, did you see increased attendance rates using fusion reading?
Yes, I just highlighted that a bit. We found, well, even in urban centers where attendance can be sporadic, we found that students were attending classes regularly, and more importantly, they were attending them throughout the school year. Now, I can't cite specific data for you now, but we do have that. I'd be glad to share it.
The other question we had, and Irma touched on this, was are the skills tackled in fusion aligned to the Common Core?
Yes, we have worked extensively here at the center to pull those Common Core state standards and look lesson by lesson with our objectives with the Common Core state standards to see what was present, and 70% of what is part of fusion meets those Common Core state standards in reading.
Yeah. And I would just add that the strategies that we've selected were chosen because they respond to the demands in core classes. And an important fact in fusion is that most of the reading students do in the fusion reading class is based in using material that they bring in from math, science, social studies, and language arts. The fusion lesson actually is, you've learned this strategy on how to summarize. We're going to summarize this section in your science textbook, and we're going to do that by following the steps for strategy integration, which really supports close reading. So there are multiple reads, multiple thinking points, stop, reflect on what you've read, so you can go deeper in the material. And we feel really good about that. And we feel that we read the literature before we put fusion together, and before the Common Core state standards were popular, we were addressing that need.
Okay, we have another question. Is there any phonics study?
Phonics study.
I was asking Mike what the question was. Is there a phonics study? Is that what you were saying, Julie?
Yes, it says, is there any phonics study within the program?
Okay, so within the bridging strategy, what we have done is what we're calling advanced phonics, flexible phonics. We do not have an extensive phonics program built within this. What we did is we looked at what are some of the key phonics skills that need to be in place to move these students to getting to reading and comprehension. Many of the students we found, because of all the funding and research going on in the early grades, are getting some good instruction at this point. So we wanted to respect that they had some exposure, and we understand some do not, because we do have ELL students, by the way, which really benefit from the bridging strategy. So our phonics program does include what we're calling flexible or advanced phonics. But no, it's not like an extensive phonics program where you would see something occurring for a whole semester just on phonics. It's really woven in with word recognition, word decoding, and fluency. And I'm glad this question came up, because it was really one that we struggled to tackle, because how do you do phonics with adolescents without them wanting to kick you under the bus? Because they're so tired of people telling them that they need to learn the long A sound or the short A sound. So I spent a lot of time in focus group with students, and truly bridging, if any one piece of this was really redesign and conceptualize the students at the table. So what you will see with the bridging strategy is that it's really set up to look like you're working out. So you'll have opportunities to do what we call stretch, opportunities to train, opportunities to go into a scrimmage, and then actually play the real deal. So we use that analogy to be respectful that we're dealing with adolescents and to bring in stuff that didn't look babyish, if you will. And students have been very responsive to that analogy and the flow, ebb and flow of the bridging strategy because of that. And it looks like Mike might have something to add to that.
I did want to add, though, that we do teach some phonics. Students learn open and closed syllables. They learn the sound of short, long vowels, and they learn consonant cluster sounds. They do it in quick bursts of 5 to 10 minutes instruction a day. They learn syllabication, and all of that leads to better word attack, better word identification, and then they pull all of that together in fluency. So Irma is correct. It's not like corrective reading or language solely focused on phonics, but we do have a phonics piece that's advanced. It's quick. We think it's clean. It supports word identification and fluency.
We have a couple more questions to get through and a few minutes to go, and we want to get to our funding piece as well. So one of the questions was, did you measure grade level reading gains using Smarter Balanced or PARC or something else?
That's a great question. That's our next effort, really, is to look at the released items. We haven't used those measures. They just came out. We've used other standardized measures to measure comprehension. For example, the Gates-McGinty. We've used this Discovery. We've used the group reading and diagnostic evaluation. We've used these fairly common reading comprehension measures that are out there, and we also look at state measures of comprehension. But we're very, very interested in looking at the released items from those Common Core State Standard tests.
Then we have a question, how much PD is required up front for the program to be effective? Does it work better if it is teacher initiated or admin initiated?
Well, first, the PD that we have found to be most effective doesn't occur just up front one time at the beginning of the year. It's spread out over the 2 years. And we have found that having the administrators at the table and support of what needs to be in place is critical. Teachers need to be at the table at some point in time in that because they are ultimately the ones faced with the implementation and the logistics of getting a classroom, say, put in place. So year one, we believe that 7 days of professional development dispersed throughout the year and responsive to where they are within implementation is important. We did try, let me give you it all, year one up front, and it just crashed and burned because it was way too much information. So we spread it out over the year one based on where they are within the curriculum. And the other thing that partners with that is coaching, if you will think of it this way, per unit. There needs to be a little bit of coaching per unit that occurs. And so year one is about 7 days of PD and a couple of, we've done work where it's on-site coaches that we've coached and we went in and done the coaching of coaches. And then the second year is about a 5-day face-to-face professional development, again, dispersed over the year with coaching involved in that.
And recognizing that not all districts can provide that level of support, McGraw Hill has established online modules that basically were written by Irma that support implementation. So those modules can supplement or take the place of some of the face-to-face, depending upon what the desire of the district is. I just wanted to touch base on the question about who should be the driver in terms of implementation, teachers or administrators. It really needs to be both. It needs to be something that, because you won't get the kind of support you need if the administration is not on board. And if teachers aren't on board, they're just not going to implement it with any measure or level of fidelity. And they're the key player. We need to get teachers, students, and administrators all on board.
Okay, thank you, Mike and Irma. We had a couple extra questions, and just for the folks that we didn't get to your questions, we will be in contact with you via email to respond to your questions further. But before we wrap up for the day, we really appreciate Mike's time and Irma's time and sharing all of this valuable information with us. But one of the things that we discussed was it's wonderful that we've identified the challenges, we've identified some solutions, but now how do we obtain funding that will allow us to implement a program in our schools? And we have with us today Erin Rush. She is our grant specialist for McGraw Hill Education. She has over 10 years of experience working with schools on local, state, and federal grant applications. Some of the grants that she's worked on include Race to the Top, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, Reading First, Head Start, and School Improvement. So as the grant specialist for McGraw Hill, she really helps schools identify some solutions that can align to some grant requirements and can work with you on grant planning, writing, and editing. And with that, Mike and Irma, I'll have you turn the presenter rights over to Erin Rush for our last few minutes to speak a little bit about that funding piece. But again, thank you both for your assistance and your time today.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Julie. I have my slides up now, and hopefully you can all see them. But at McGraw Hill, we encourage you to look at funding as more than just applying for a grant for many reasons. First is that there are many strategies to consider that will give you the results you desire. The first is looking at existing budgets and fund balances. We recommend that you check entitlement and other local fund balances in the spring. You may be surprised that when several are combined, you have a significant amount available. And this can be true of any other grants you have, too, if you look at funding balances towards the end of that grant period. And some examples would be Title I, Part A, Title III, which deals with instruction for limited English proficient and immigrant students, as well as IDEA, which is special education. Another strategy is to repurpose and reorganize to meet priorities. And we recommend that you start with the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish and adjust your priorities. You want to avoid layering new solutions on top of old, less successful ones. And then next, you're going to align all of your existing resources to your redefined priorities. That is, you're going to repurpose from any old, more traditional models that didn't give the desired results, and think about where you can direct your attention to new programs that show more promise. And some examples of things that you can do where you might be able to free up budget categories are ordering supplies and materials jointly with other schools or agencies in order to get discounts and free shipping, cutting back on travel and supply costs by implementing virtual field trips or virtual science labs, or considering video conferencing to enable students to work with others both near and far. Another thing that we've seen other districts implement with success is to pass a city measure to add a 1-cent sales tax and then use a % of that money for the school system in general for particular district initiatives such as digital programs or other programs you might be looking at implementing. And the last example is to garner community support by getting to know the local businesses and people in your community, and also consider any local community foundations that may exist in your area. Then also, once you've thought about kind of reorganizing and reprioritizing and looking at the budgets that you already have, you may consider competitive grants as a solution for funding the project that you're looking for. The McGraw-Hill School website has some grant writing tips as well as links to the state grant pages for each of your states. But some examples of grants that are out there that you may consider for adolescent reading programs would be the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant. This is a grant for after-school programs, and it can be very good, especially when you're talking about intervention programs that may not be used during the core reading, the part of the day, and used after school working with students who need a little bit more assistance. The Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Grant, it impacts Georgia, Louisiana, Montana, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Texas. And that is to advance literacy skills for birth through grade 12. And then we have a couple other grants listed that you can consider. One thing to keep in mind is that grant opportunities that completely match what you're aiming to accomplish may be hard to find. If you do find one, the turnaround from when you write and submit it to when you win and receive that grant can be 6 months or more. We suggest that you always embark on a grant request with a plan B in the event that you do not win the grant that you've applied for. And finally, McGraw-Hill Education provides comprehensive grant support. When you've identified a grant you would like to apply for, we can help in many ways. And some of those being we can look at the grant requirements with you and help you think about how you might want to structure your project. We can give you descriptions of how Fusion Reading aligns to your goals, as well as how it aligns to the grant requirements. And once you've gotten started on your grant writing, we can participate in that process by providing review and edits. The email for the McGraw-Hill Grants Department is on the slide now, and you can email that at any time to discuss funding strategies or to request assistance. And with that, Julie, I'll try to wrap it up and keep everybody from going too far over our 1 hour.
Thanks, Erin. That's some great information. And again, for anybody who's interested, the McGraw-Hill Education Grant website is posted on the chat currently, www.mheonline.com/pages/display/grants. And then as Erin mentioned, if you're interested in grant support, you can email grants, G-R-A-N-T-S, at mheducation.com. So we really appreciate Erin's participation. Again, thank you so much to Mike and Irma for the valuable information that they've offered to us today. If you've asked a question and we've not gotten to it, we will get back to you and respond via email. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we will be awarding one teacher set of books, and that's 7 books, including the Establish the Course that was mentioned. So those will be awarded by email. Also, keep in mind when you close your browser today, you'll notice there'll be a survey, and your feedback is extremely important. So if you're able to provide that to us quickly in a few short questions, we would be most appreciative of that. Again, thank you for your participation today, and we will look forward to having you join us again to discuss adolescent literacy at some point in the future. Thanks, and everyone have a great day.